Welcome, everybody, to the very first video of Viva, named after the response when people say Viva Cristo Rey. The answer is Viva. So my name is Father John Brown. I am a Jesuit in New Orleans, Louisiana. I am today with Father David Paternostro, a Jesuit originally from Houston, Texas, and currently working on his PhD in philosophy at St. Louis University. So welcome, Father Paternostro.
Thank you.
Tell us all about what you're working on.
So I am studying Thomas Aquinas up at St. Louis University. Aquinas was a great medieval philosopher and theologian, probably one of the greatest thinkers in the Catholic Church. I'd say we still go back to him quite a bit for our thinking on the sacraments, on who God is and what it means to live the Christian life in many ways.
Is it possible to understand the Catechism without understanding a little bit of St. Thomas Aquinas?
In some ways, no. I mean, the most simple person who is believing in Jesus Christ, I think, understands what the Catechism is about. But if we're trying to ask, why does the Church believe that the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, for instance? Our understanding and what's in the Catechism comes directly from Aquinas.
I'm sorry to interrupt just for 1 second, but I noticed that your Marxlency Karl Marx, also known as the Chunky Crusader, has joined the live stream. I had no idea if anybody was going to watch this, and I see someone has. How's our audio? Can you hear everything we're saying? Let's hope that he can. All right. Okay, so I titled the video, sounds good, thank you.
Excellent.
I titled this video, Is the Problem of Evil Still a Problem? And the reason why I thought that would be a good question is because it seems to me that the problem of evil, right? I'm going to try to sum it up, and you tell me if I've got this right.
Sure.
The problem of evil would say we have a problem because we have a God who Christians claim is all good. He's all loving, and he's all powerful, right? So omnibenevolent. I'm sorry, no, not all good, all loving, and all powerful. All good, all knowing, and all powerful. I'm sorry, all good, all knowing, and all powerful. So if he's all good, you would think that he would only want good things to happen. If he were all knowing, he would know what the world turned out to be. And if he were all powerful, and turned out to be meaning there's a lot of evil in the world, and what the world turned out to be, he would have known that would happen. So it seems that we have a problem in the sense that we have a world that everyone knows has evil in it. Everybody feels the evil. Everybody understands that there's evil in it. So am I summing that up correctly? You are, yeah.
One way to think about it is like if you're walking down the street and you see this little old lady getting beaten up by somebody, you're going to want to try and intervene. You're going to want to try and do something. And if you don't, then people are going to say, well, what, were you just too cowardly? Was there something wrong?
Maybe she deserved it.
Maybe she deserved it. But whatever happens, you're going to assume either there's something wrong with the woman or something wrong with you if you just watch another person who looks innocent to be tortured, to be harmed like that.
So why doesn't God stop it?
That is the question. And one of the answers that Aquinas gives to this answer is that if God allows something evil to happen, it is for the sake of drawing some greater good out of it.
The world's a better place because this little old lady got beat up as she's crossing the street.
Possibly. So here's one way to think about it. There was a movie that came out a few years ago called The Imitation Game. And it was about these code breakers during World War II. And they were trying to crack the Nazi code and figure out what the Nazis were doing. So in one scene in the movie, and this actually happened, they do crack the Nazi code and figure out, okay, the Nazi ships are here, they're going to attack us there. But one thing that they realized really early on is we can't intervene in every single situation where we know the Nazis are going to attack Allied shipping or other Allied troops. Because if we do it every single time, the Nazis are going to figure out we've broken their code, they're going to change their code, and then we have to start all over. So they had to figure out when to intervene and when not to intervene in order to bring about Allied victory. And so part of the understanding, it's a little bit like that if God does not intervene in a way that we would expect him to, that it is for the sake of some ultimate good, or it's for the sake of drawing a greater good out of the mess that we might see in front of us.
I like it, but I have a lot of questions.
Fire
Okay.
away. Yeah.
All right. Here are some of my questions. Number one.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that if God had made a perfect world in which no evil existed at all, it wouldn't be as good as a world in which evil existed?
In some ways, yeah. Yeah. Think of it as a painting with a whole bunch of lights and shadows, like a chiaroscuro painting from the Renaissance. And the way that the shadows and the lights interact with each other, when you step back and you look at the whole painting, it is a whole lot more beautiful than if I just took a giant bucket of bright white paint and just slapped it on a canvas.
Okay. All right. So, okay. I think that's a pretty good question, right?
Yeah.
Is it still, this is a question that's coming online right now. Is it still the right way to say it, that evil is a privation of the good? Is that still the best way to describe evil? The privation of the good, meaning, you know, just the way that a shadow is not a thing in and of itself. It just means it's a privation of the light.
Yeah.
Is that the right way to say it?
It is. I think that's a very solid way to say it. Because any time that there's evil in the world, every time that we see that there is evil or we experience evil, we understand that there's something that's not there that ought to be there. And that might be, if I were to add anything to that definition, evil is the privation of a good. It's evil is a privation of some kind of a good that should be there. So like if a disorder, exactly. Like I should be alive. If I keel over dead right now, you would recognize there is something missing from this person. But when I look at, you know, this mug here, it's not alive and I'm not sad about that. Life should not be in that, but life should be in me.
Okay. All right. So when God, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, right?
Sure.
So what does Thomas Aquinas have to say, or what do you have to say, being a, you know, if you're thinking along the lines of Thomistic thought? In the end of the world, God's going to make everything right. God's goodness is going to rule. God's goodness is going to just absolutely overwhelm us, might be the nice way to say it.
Yeah.
Why aren't we like that now? Why doesn't God just pull the trigger and say, look, the game is fixed anyway, right? The game is fixed. God's going to win. We've read the book of Revelation. We know what's coming. God wins. Why doesn't he just win right now?
Yeah. Because ultimately God made us for love. And love is something you can't force a person to love. Like I can't put a gun to your head and say, love me right now like you should. You know, you might say, okay, you're a nice person. You might just say good things. I might beat you into submission. But beating somebody into submission and saying the game is fixed is different from saying, let me inspire you to love me. Let me allow you to grow and let me allow your heart to become bigger in this world so that when we meet each other face to face, you're going to truly love me as much as you can. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to try to explain it.
Yeah.
And tell me where I'm lacking nuance, right? Tell me where I need some help. I see somebody at Ben's workshop in the channel, for example, has said, what would you learn from a perfect world? Well, suppose my answer is, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I think I would either learn perfection or I would just start off knowing everything. What's wrong with that? Why is learning better than just knowing?
Yeah.
Why is learning to love or being convinced to love better than just loving? Or am I getting the definition of love wrong altogether?
Yeah. Well, part of it is because just the way that human beings are, we learn over a period of time. We're creatures that exist in time, and it takes us a process. We look at examples, we look at people who are loving and say, I want to be like you. But sometimes we can also look at people who are really terrible and say, I don't want to do that. I absolutely do not want to make those choices and end up like a Stalin or end up like a Hitler. Okay.
Right. I like the way you're going with this, but now that opens up another can of worms. And again, I'm just sort of spitting stuff out there, and I'm not saying, so for those of you who are out there wondering if I believe what I'm saying, I do not necessarily stand by these dumb questions that I'm asking, but so, okay. I'm looking at the world. There's all kind of suffering in it. There's all kind of things going on. And you're telling me that somehow God's got a plan. Somehow God understands that this world with all of its things in it that just seem, now on one hand, I think I get it, right? So like, whatever it is that we're going through, God somehow has a plan. He's going to make it better. And if God had chosen the level of evil to exist at some other place, what would that look like? So I imagine one world where the worst thing that ever happens to me is I get a hangnail and I'm like, oh my gosh, this hangnail, what am I going to do? And I'm going to write like songs about my sadness, and I'm going to like dye my hair green, and nobody understands me and my hangnail problem and all that. Okay, so I got a hangnail. It's the worst thing ever. And then there's other worlds in which I can imagine that we would be so accustomed to all the bad things in the world that we would hardly even recognize the good in it and all that kind of stuff. So it seems to me that there's like this threshold of evil that God allows, and sometimes he just stops it, right? Yeah. I think of, for example, here in New Orleans, our patroness is Our Lady of Prompt Succor. And there are these amazing stories of our Blessed Mother coming in and saving the city from a terrible fire, or even from the Limeys who were coming in and trying to and back in 1815 in January, when they the Battle of New Orleans, and Our Lady came to the aid of all of these New Orleanians and pirates to be able to fend off the British and all that kind of stuff. And it was great. Yeah. And we say, Our Lady saved us. Our Lady did us something great. I think about, the gospel from yesterday, which was Thanksgiving. And the gospel that we read from at Mass was about how Jesus, cures these lepers. And I think that's great. God did a favor, but God also didn't set up the world such that these lepers would just be immortal now, right? He could have just given them immortality. Yeah. He could have. So there seems to be like some kind of like level that God decides he's willing to tolerate in his permissive will in some kind of way, and say, I'm okay because we get love out of this, right? Yeah. I'll let these evil things happen because we get love out of this, and I won't let these other evil things because so okay, now I have multiple questions. Number one, what am I to make of the 13-year-old angsty atheist who says, oh, the world is so bad, how can there be a good God? And now his soul is in danger, and God, who must love this 13-year-old, right? It's probably easier for God to love that 13-year-old than it is for me. So God must love this 13-year-old, and yet his soul is in danger right now because of the evil he experiences. His parents are mean to him, and his gym coach doesn't understand him or whatever. So what do we do with that?
Yeah. I think part of what we do is, if a 13-year-old comes to you and says, I just see so much evil in the world, I have trouble believing in God. I think the first thing we do is take that 13-year-old seriously. I think he's right in some ways that like the evil that we experience is unpleasant. There are people who are suffering. And so then the question should be, all right, you're right. This isn't how things should be in the end. And so what is the response that can draw out of us? How, like, if I encounter a homeless person on the street, I can either complain about the fact that there are homeless people, I can complain about structural inequalities, I can complain about all this, or I can maybe kneel down and see if this person is okay, give the person some water. I can allow my heart to be moved by another person. And I think that's the beginnings of the response. Allow the world to break your heart a little bit so that your heart can grow a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's very practical advice, and it's good. What about this question then? Is God's love for us gratuitous? So here's the way maybe I would frame it. Okay. Yeah. God is perfect. God is all loving, right? All the things, all the makings of the problem of evil, right? Which we also known as Theodicy, right? So all the makings of the problem of evil, let's say I buy in all those things, and I would say, okay, so God, doesn't God have to do what God has to do? Like, he's not going to do something, he's not going to choose a lesser of two goods, right? So he's always going to choose the most good thing. And if he didn't, it wouldn't be in his nature. We couldn't say he was all good. Yeah. So God somehow has created a world. He knows exactly how to make this world. He can, let's use this to borrow a whole different kind of theological problem, but fine tuning, right? He's got this, he's fine tuning the evil that he's allowing to happen in the world because he knows the greater good that can come out of it, et cetera, et cetera. How much of this is like a free will? How analogous is this to the free will of a human being who would tune it and say, I'm deciding what the best is, and not I'm deciding what the best is. I know what the best is, and I tune to the best. But I, as a human being, could choose not to do that. So if I did choose the best, it would be gratuitous. It would be, on my part, a gratuitous loving act to choose the best thing out there and to tune it to that world. If God is perfect and kind of like it's in his nature to be perfect and all that, how much choice does God have to do that or not do it? Does that make sense?
It does. So God is perfectly free in his decisions to create. It's not as though our love for God makes God better or richer. God experiences the love of the Trinity, the Father and the Son and the Spirit. They love each other perfectly. So it's not like God was deprived. God created us basically because God thought that we would enjoy it. He thought that we would enjoy existence. He wanted to share his existence, and he wanted more of that goodness for us. He wanted to share it. I think that's the best way to think about it. And I think you're right that there is something analogous to us saying, let me see if I can fine tune this thing, if I can tweak this thing. Because of course, Genesis tells us we're made in the image and likeness of God. So there is going to be a way in which the way that I make choices and the way that God makes choices are going to be similar. The big difference is because God is totally self-sufficient, God needs nothing. And so everything he gives is just pure gift.
So this is a for real problem
that
I have. This is a real, I don't know, problem. The struggle, how to describe this. So I've got to hold it to be true that God's love is a gratuitous gift. I've got to hold that as being a true thing. I also seem to understand God as being the good, right? God is goodness itself. It's like asking water not to be wet if you imagine God having any other choice, right? So in some sense, it's not it feels like maybe it's the wrong way to describe it, to say this is a free act on the part of God, a gratuitous gift on the part of God. That feels like I am. It feels like my description of God is a little too human. And I imagine that God and the angels, in fact, who have this sort of perfect will, and even demons have a perfect will in the sense that it doesn't waver one way or the other, right? Once a demon has chosen to be evil, he's going to be evil forever, right? And if he chooses to be good, he can be good forever. That's why we say Satan's first words are, non serviam, right? I will not serve. His first words out of his mouth, because if he had ever chosen to be good before that, he would still be good to this day. But we say, that there's this perfect will that says I either will the good or don't will the good. And so, or will what I'm made for, I should say. Will what I'm made for or don't will what I'm made for. And so God, I imagine, his will, is it like that? I mean, is that what Thomas Aquinas at least says?
So Aquinas is going to get at this when he talks about God's justice. And we do, as Catholics, as Christians, do believe God is just. Scripture talks all about how our God is a God of justice. He is a just God. So, but justice, we tend to think of justice as we're repaying a debt. We're giving something to somebody that we owe to them. So there's a way in which that doesn't quite apply to God. And so here's the way. So God did not have to create you. God did not have to create a single thing. Everything that he created was gratuitous. But what we do say is, once God does create the world, once God does bring creatures into being, he gives those creatures what they need. In other words, God is a good and provident father for us. And fathers know, if I've created these children, if I have given life to my children, I am going to give my children everything that they need in order to survive. So the gratuitous part is God making you to be. And once God makes you to be, God says, okay, I've made you to exist, and now I'm going to give you everything that you need. And in that way, God is just.
Just and merciful, thank God.
And merciful.
And merciful, thank God, right? Because so our wills, we go back and forth. We often shoot ourselves in the foot. I mean, that's the real problem of evil, right? So I'm suffering. Everybody knows suffering. Suffering seems to come at me in a few different ways. One of the ways is, I can shoot myself in the foot. I've got nobody to blame but me. But if I shoot you in the foot, why does God allow you to suffer? Why would God allow you to suffer from some evil act that I did? It seems like now we have two bad things. I committed an evil act and you're suffering from it, which is, is suffering always evil according to Thomas Aquinas?
Yes and no. So suffering is always evil in the sense that you don't really like it. So in that sense, we can say, suffering is unpleasant. But so here's one way that suffering can actually be thought of as good. So there are people, for instance, in the world who don't really have pain receptors in their bodies. But one of the things that pain does is it lets you know, like if I don't have any pain receptors in my hand and I put my hand on a hot stove, pain is going to tell me, take your hand off the stove. If I don't have those receptors, I'm just going to keep my hand on the stove until my skin is burnt off.
It's good that you hurt. It's good
Yes.
it's good that you yearn for something that you don't have.
There is,
that you should have.
Yes.
That you don't have that you should have. You know. Okay. Again, I'm going to sort of like write it out in crayon, and you tell me where I need the nuance here. Right. But it seems like, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, when we make choices, we're always trying to fulfill some good.
Yes.
Is that's correct? According to St. Thomas Aquinas, more or less,
correct,
right?
yeah.
You know. So, okay. So every now and then I listen to guys like Jordan Peterson who would say that that's wrong. He says that's wrong because, you know, look at the guys the two Columbine school shooters, right? So go back to the 90s, I guess. Yeah. And these guys make every plan that they can to cause as much suffering as they can. And you know, now listen, Jordan Peterson, I believe that he's an expert in the criminal mind, right? In the criminal psyche. He does all these, this is what he studies. He studies essentially the problem of evil in the mind of human beings, right? That there's some people who just appear to be evil. They're really, really evil. And they're not choosing the good. On the surface, at least it appears that way. They're not choosing the good. Is Satan choosing? Does Satan believe he's choosing the good when he says non serviam?
Yes. So when Aquinas says everybody chooses the good, so what he doesn't mean is every choice is morally good. Of course, Aquinas is a good Catholic priest. He's going to recognize there is sin in the world and there are sinners. What Aquinas means when he says everybody chooses the good is effectively everybody acts for some benefit. Now, they could be wrong about the benefit that they think they're going to be getting, or they could be right about the benefit that they're getting, but they just don't care about all of the other destruction that they're getting. So you're getting like 2 pounds of benefit for 5 tons of trouble.
Right.
And that's where problems like Satan's choice to not serve God.
And you say that they don't care about it either. They don't know about it, so they don't realize that shooting you in the foot is going to hurt me, you know, overall or something like that. Or they don't care about it. What if they care? What if they want you to suffer? Yeah. Is that possible? Is that, according to Thomas Aquinas' way of looking at it, can you want suffering directly, or is it just you want the pleasure that comes from other people suffering? Like when I watch when I watch the New England Patriots lose to the New Orleans Saints on a Sunday, right? You know, part of it is I'm happy that the New Orleans Saints win. Part of it, I'm just glad to watch the New England Patriots lose, right? You know, Schadenfreude is an indirect, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, that is an indirect good. How does that work? Yeah,
you're taking some kind of pleasure in somebody else's pain in that case, and so there could be any number of reasons why you're taking pleasure. You know, maybe you think the New England Patriots are a bunch of cheaters, and you think, you know, in them losing, justice is being done, and this is awesome. And or you could just say, you know, when I cause somebody else pain, I feel more powerful. And so there's the pleasure and the perceived goodness of feeling powerful and feeling in control of your life.
Yeah.
And that
feels good.
That feels good. It feels good to be in control.
Yeah, that feels good. Wow. All right. So I imagine that all the problems that we're talking about right now are things that have been discussed philosophically for a very long time, right? There are at least elements of this that go back to pre-Christian days with the you know, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, right? When they are denying they talk about how do we know, you know, like when they're talking about the gods, they're saying the gods don't seem to always be in accord. So some God must be above the other gods, or it even seems like they're somehow acting below a sense of goodness, that goodness is above the gods and all that kind of stuff. And Socrates gets in trouble for this because essentially this is like he's corrupting the youth. He's accused of being what they would have termed as an atheist, meaning they don't believe that the gods are the highest, but in fact they believe that they never showed any sign that they don't believe in the gods, right? Little g, the gods, but that they believe in something bigger. So in some sense, they were better theists than you know than a lot of modern day atheists for sure, right? Okay. So in 2022, We've got Father David Paternostro, who's a priest of God in the Society of Jesus, a good Jesuit who is studying St. Thomas Aquinas and knows all these. Why are you writing on the problem of evil? Hasn't everybody already said everything that there is to say? And don't we already have all these answers?
Well, I'm writing on the problem of evil because people are still perplexed by it. And they're still perplexed because evil is visceral. Unlike saying, oh, what about God and science? Like that can be pretty abstract. Not everybody really cares about God and science, not to a certain level. Everybody cares if their grandma is suffering. And so,
unless she deserves it.
Unless she deserves it.
Then I don't care.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so one of the new directions that the problem of evil is being taken in these days. So we're shifting from what's sometimes called third person accounts, where it's very objective, to second person accounts, where it's, what is this saying about you and God, about my relationship with God? And what is it saying? How can we talk about my life story and the story that I tell about my life? And is there a way to talk about how the evil that I might be experiencing in my life allows me to be a more loving person, allows my story, in a sense, to become a more loving and a more holy one, and opens my heart up more to Jesus Christ? And that's that idea of relationship and story are where a lot of philosophers today are starting to really zero in on questions about God and evil.
Okay, I love what you're saying, and it's this is truly interesting to me. Aren't you're working on a PhD in philosophy?
Yes.
And you're talking about Jesus Christ, and you're talking about love and stories and things like that. Is that where in the world, if I'm a young man and I'm thinking about studying philosophy, but I want to study philosophy that takes into account all of the things that you're talking about, where could I go and study where I might run into this kind of way of doing philosophy?
Yeah. I think a lot of our Catholic universities, like the St. Louis University where I'm at, are very good, and I think have very good philosophy programs. Individuals who are committed to thinking with the mind of the church and engaging with the best that human thought has to offer at the moment, and trying to bring those two together and say, okay, you might have a reasonable point. What can Revelation say? What can the church say? What can we as Christians say to these reasonable questions, like the 13-year-old seeing suffering in the world?
Yeah, of all the things that we've talked about, of all the things that you mentioned, that makes me the happiest. I suffer the least when I think that, wait, there's a good Jesuit university, St. Louis University in the Midwest, and the philosophy department is as good as I remember it when I studied philosophy there, going on almost 20 years ago. I studied philosophy there, and I remember the philosophy department being so impressive to me. There was even a young Lutheran woman who was studying Thomas Aquinas back then, becoming a Thomas Aquinas scholar, and she was in the middle of, in fact, converting to becoming a Catholic. And her name is Professor Eleanor Stump, Dr. Eleanor Stump, and she still writes about these things, especially evil, and especially the problem of evil. And this is why you're lucky enough to study. I'm guessing studying who's directing?
She's my doctoral dissertation director.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fantastic. I'm edified to hear that's still going on. So just quickly, I know we have not exhausted that topic or anything like that. Real quick, tell us a little bit about what made you want to become a Jesuit. What made you want to study philosophy? What made you want to go, even after doing all of the required studies, to go back and do even more, and study this topic? Tell me a little bit about those motivations.
So as becoming a Jesuit, I was very fortunate to go to Strake Jesuit College Prep in Houston, the Jesuit high school there in Houston. And I remember just being very impressed, very in awe of a lot of the Jesuits that I saw there. And I think, one of my favorite Jesuits who was there, him well, Father Douglas Hippolyte. He was my French teacher in high school.
Sure.
And when I think of a learned priest, like even then, like when I was 15-year-old me, sophomore in high school, Father Hippolyte, he was a master of, I think, a dozen languages, honest to goodness, and just a very generous soul, putting that knowledge at the service of his students and putting his priesthood at the service of his students. I saw a priest like Father Hippolyte, my French teacher in high school, and I was like, I want to be that man.
Such an impressive Jesuit, really and truly. Yeah, so he was working in a high school, first class intellect.
Yes,
an incredible personal story. He's Creole from South Louisiana who grew up speaking, I would say, poor English and poor French, and then really, really exercised his mind to the point where he's just a fantastic linguist, a great teacher. Yeah. Worked in secondary ed most of his life, and still going strong, I think.
Yeah.
All right. And so how did the process go for you to, I know, so for those of y'all, for the benefit of those of y'all watching this video, I've been knowing Father Paternostro since he entered the Jesuits. And he's also spent some time working here at the high school where I'm at right now, here in New Orleans, Louisiana, working and you were at the time working at a parish downtown for a little while.
Yep.
And then you've even worked in the school for a little while as well, right?
I did.
So you've got a lot of experience teaching at the secondary ed, level. How do you find yourself? How did the discernment go? How did you wind up studying, again, working on your PhD in philosophy under the great Dr. Eleanor Stump?
So a lot of it was a question of what are the needs of the church. As Dr. Stump herself is fond of saying, the church needs every brain cell she can get. And so just talking with my superiors that, I have an interest in possibly helping the church think through certain issues, especially philosophical issues. My superiors recognizing there is an ongoing need, and also a need for Jesuits who are available to help form the next generation of priests. Because even if you aren't going to be a professional philosopher, every Catholic priest, because the church recognizes that philosophy gives us certain intellectual tools, mental tools to think through questions about God and religion and the great questions of life. Every priest, whether you're a Jesuit, a Dominican, a Franciscan, diocesan priest, you'll study some philosophy. And so they also, my superiors also recognized we need somebody that we want to trust, who knows philosophy and can help form this next generation of priests.
Yeah, I know you're a good priest. I know you say Mass every day. I know, that there are a lot of people who benefit from your personal presence there in St. Louis. I know people who know you, they like you a lot. You've also got a Twitter following on
Yes.
Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. I've never been on Twitter. I've only seen things people cut and paste from Twitter and send me directly and say, you got to read this or whatever. But plug your Twitter. What's your Twitter handle? What do you call it? Is it a handle?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is David Paternostro. My name is just so long I had to chop off the O, but everything. So it's David Paternostr.
David Paternostr.
Yep.
Without the O.
Without the O, with the @ sign in front of that, and then that is my Twitter handle.
All right, I'm going to try to put this in the chat just so that anybody sees it.
Yep.
So you should follow Father David Paternostr and on the Twitter, and you say good things on the Twitter. Do you get into like the big debates with people and fights on Twitter that some people get into? It's okay if you do. A lot of people get excited about that kind of stuff.
The fights I'm not so interested in, because I think usually the fights are just people yelling at each other, and they like the sound
yelling
of yelling
on Twitter.
Yeah.
All caps kind of stuff. Okay.
But I do enjoy having discussions with people. And I think sometimes my experience is when people come to a conversation with good faith discussion and questions, and sometimes I'm one of those question askers, then, we can get engaged in ways and with people that we wouldn't otherwise. And so the questions and the conversations I do enjoy getting into. The fights I stay away from.
Yeah. Excellent. How do you manage to do that? How do you like something? It seems to me that a lot of times these platforms. So, okay, now this is just a thought here. So correct me if I get all this wrong, but it seems to me that in the world, we ought to face to face, you can afford to have a little bit of kind of tension and figure some things out mano a mano sometimes, right? But it seems to me that when I go to write something, or I go to say something that's going to be online or whatever, it seems to me that because that it's so easy to take that stuff out of context, I might be limited in how many characters I can type or how many minutes I can say something. It seems to me that I want to be very careful not to spin that being even appearing anything but perfectly charitable and all that kind of stuff, or I'll just even avoid saying bad things about anybody. Whereas in private, maybe like you get what I'm saying, or I get kind of excited and say something. How do you manage to avoid the flip flop of that, where in person we're so nice, but when we get online we can be so vicious? To me that's the exact flip flop, right? I'm not a huge Mike Tyson fan, but I think Mike Tyson said, you know, I'm like paraphrasing, but he said something like, everybody needs to get punched in the face once in a while. You know, like everybody needs to get punched in the face once in a while. You just get reminded that there are limits to what we can, to how, what jerks we can be. How do you, okay, so my question is, how do you keep your heart in the right place? And I mean, do you have a favorite saint? Do you have a favorite prayer? Do you have a favorite? I mean, what do you do to keep yourself civil?
You know, I think sometimes I will just, if I have to say a quick little prayer, sometimes just the space of a Hail Mary is all that it takes to remind me, you know, Mary loves this person, Mary loves me, and I should treat this person as a beloved child of Mary, a beloved child of God our Father. And sometimes that Hail Mary can just be all you need to just deflate, take that breath, cool down a little bit. And I love, you know, Bishop Barron, I think, is just wonderful at having good, productive engagements. And one of his mottos is kill them with kindness. Just continue to be kind, continue, as our Lord said, turn the other cheek, show them that love. And if I can't, then it's not worth it.
Especially online, right? I mean, especially online, where somebody's going to jump into a middle of a conversation you're having online. And have missed all of the stuff in the beginning. They're going to miss whatever resolution you come to. All they're seeing is this little snapshot of you being snarky, you know, of you being kind of a jerk. So like I pray and I have saints. I have plenty of devotions and that, you know, I'm into. But the number one thing is I just think if somebody were to just see this little, you know, thing, are they going to mistake me for a total jerk? You know, or, you know, like, and then there's the other question, like, if, you know, if all of a sudden being a Christian were outlawed, would there be enough evidence to convict me, you know? And so like I always think, like, if, you know, it's not just between me and this person, it's in front of everybody. And you know, another thing I'll think of sometimes is I'll think at some point we're going to have to see each other and hug it out in heaven. And I don't want that to be any harder than it needs to be. Right? I don't want that to be any harder than it needs to be. That may even be a prerequisite to finally enjoying the fullness of the beatific vision, is that I'm going to have to hug it out with everybody I've been a jerk to. So
well, and that's Dorothy Day was fond of saying, you know, you only love God as much as the person you love the least, and I think that can be something helpful to remember when you're on Twitter. Okay. Anything else you want to say? Yeah, I will. One more plug is for the Catholic Studies Center at St. Louis University. I think that center, under the direction of Father Matthew Baugh, does absolutely terrific work in the forming of young men and women at St. Louis University. And I hope you go check out and support the fine work that the Catholic Studies Center out there does. I'm sure they will. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. For those of you who were watching online and still are watching online, thank you all very much. I appreciate y'all's presence as well. You know, I don't have any intro music or any outro music. If we have any musicians that might be able to help me with that, I'll take the help. Still figuring out how to do all this. So, you know, I think half of this conversation, Father Paternostro, was out of frame, and I apologize for all that. We don't want to sit that close. We were friends and all, but we didn't want to sit that close together. So anyway, thank you all. I appreciate it, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. Thank you very much. Have a good night.